There's a myth about Bible translation that you hear from theologians and even many pastors. And while it sounds harmless, it's a myth that can cause real problems. Today I'm going to explain what that myth is, the problems it causes, and crucially, what we should be doing instead. I'm Dr. Jonathan Downey, and this is Multilingual Church from Integrity Languages. There are over 450 translations of the Bible into English. So how can you tell them apart? That's a very good question. Ask many theologians and even many pastors, and they'll most likely give you an answer that involves a chart or a spectrum like this one, or even this one. Here's what those charts or spectra are trying to tell you. According to these charts, there are two approaches to Bible translation. Either you do your best to stay as close as possible to the wording and grammar of the original Hebrew, Greek and Aramaic, or you make it easier for people to understand. That's why on this side, you get translations that try to preserve the wording of the Hebrew, Greek and Aramaic. And on this side, you get Bible translations that explain what these words mean. Theologians call translations on this side formal equivalents or literal, and they call translations on this side dynamic equivalents, functional equivalents, or free. The idea is that you can use this translation spectrum to help you pick whatever Bible translation you want that will work for you. But there's a problem with this Bible translation spectrum. For a start, the people who actually translate the Bible have been slowly backing away from it. Look at the preface of the English Standard Version, or ESV, which is one of the most conservative of the English Bible translations, and you will see terms such as essentially literal and word for word. But these are wrapped in scare quotes. It's also worth noting that only 2 paragraphs later the translators talk about a trade-off and use hedges such as to the extent that plain English permits and the meaning in each case allows. The translators of the New Living Translation, one which is often wrongly placed at the other end of the spectrum to the ESV, are, if anything, even less wedded to the ideas in those charts. In their preface, they do admit that English Bible translations tend to be governed by 1 or 2 general translation theories. These are the 2 we just saw. The first theory has been called formal equivalence, literal or word-for-word translation, blah de blah. The second theory has been called dynamic equivalence, functional equivalence, or thought-for-thought translation. Sounds fair enough. But they also say the pure application of either of these translation philosophies would create translations at opposite ends of the translation spectrum. But in reality, all translations contain a mixture of these 2 philosophies. Even more interestingly, they say clearly down here, the translators of the New Living Translation set out to render the message of the original text of Scripture in clear contemporary English. As they did so, they kept the concerns of both formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence in mind. It says, on the other hand, the translators rendered the message more dynamically when the literal rendering was hard to understand, was misleading, or yielded archaic or foreign wording. So the translators of the New Living Translation aren't particularly wedded to the traditional spectrum or charts either. This is all very interesting, and we could have picked any 20th or 21st century Bible translation. For example, the New International Version makes no reference whatsoever to any form of equivalence in its preface. Yet the most powerful piece of evidence that those translating the Bible don't find these charts or spectra useful is that those translating the Bible into new languages don't use them at all. Let me say that again. The people translating the Bible into new languages do not use the free versus literal or formal versus functional or dynamic equivalence charts or spectra. Here are the basic principles and procedures for Bible translation by the Forum of Bible Agencies International, an umbrella group for all of the agencies organising, supervising and providing the training for Bible translators around the world. There is no free versus literal here. There is no mention of formal equivalents, nor dynamic equivalents, nor even any kind of translation equivalents at all. So if Bible translators are quietly walking away from the kinds of charts and spectra loved by theologians and some pastors, why do we still have them? That's a good question, which I'll answer after taking a short opportunity to tell you about a book. And the book I want to talk about is this one. If your church is involved in the work of welcoming those who are new to your country or who don't speak English as their main or first language, this is the book for you. It's called Multilingual Church. It works through some of the things that don't work when churches are trying to reach people who speak different languages, and some of the things that do, and goes step by step through the stages that you'll need to be able to do that properly. It's now also available on audio. See the link in the description. So far, we've seen that while theologians and some pastors like to use charts like these to help people choose a Bible translation, actual Bible translators don't seem to have much time for them. When they do use them, it seems to be because everyone else does, not because they're actually that useful. So where did they come from? Weirdly, given how widespread they are, it's quite easy to trace where they come from. And when we find out where they come from, it's quite simple to see why people still use them and why they might actually be damaging for churches. The source of all those diagrams and spectra is this book, which actually doesn't contain any diagrams or spectra like those, but never mind. Towards a Science of Translating by Eugene Nida is an incredibly influential book. It basically kicked off the modern field of translation studies. It was a key book in new ways of thinking about translation equivalents, more on that a bit later, and for a long time it was a foundational text in translator training in the US and Europe, including for Bible translators. Right here on page 159, we have the following words. However, there are fundamentally two different types of equivalents. One which may be called formal, and another which is primarily dynamic. There it is. There is the source of formal equivalents and dynamic equivalents as terms. The theologians and pastors are right. Or are they? If we read the entire book and don't just take this one sentence out of context, we can see that it's not about classifying entire translations into types. It's about the choices in front of individual translators as they work on specific passages. In fact, earlier in the book, Professor Nida points out that if we're going to classify translations into types, which is what we're doing when we create these charts, equivalence is not the right tool. Instead, we need to understand the nature of the message, the purpose or purposes of the author and, by proxy, of the translator, and the type of audience. That's page 156. Another important point is that when most people use the phrase formal equivalence, they use it to mean something like word-for-word translation. There are two problems with this. The first is that throughout the entirety of the book, Professor Nida shows why word-for-word translation is rarely, if ever, a good idea. Anyone who speaks two languages will have a whole bunch of examples of this. My personal favourite is that if you were to look up the individual words in the French phrase ça te dit in a dictionary, you'd get something like that you speaks or that to you speaks. That doesn't mean anything in English. What does the phrase actually mean? Well, a good translation would be something like, are you up for it or are you interested? The only word in common between the two is the word you. The second problem is that when Professor Nida uses formal equivalence, he's using it to mean a translation that tries to keep as many of the linguistic and stylistic forms of the original as possible. For example, formal equivalence focuses attention on the message itself, in both form and content. In such a translation, one is concerned with such correspondences as poetry to poetry, sentence to sentence, and concept to concept. That's page 159, the same page as we get the ideas of formal and dynamic equivalence from. In fact, it's the very next paragraph from the one where he names different kinds of equivalence. So the charts used by theologians and pastors are not respected by translators and don't even fairly reflect the book that they're based on. But are they actually dangerous? To answer that, we need a story. Not long after I qualified as an interpreter, I found my interpreting skills in high demand. I was in a church of about 12 to 15 people in the west of Scotland when suddenly, out of nowhere, some families from the Democratic Republic of Congo arrived in the church. They didn't speak much English, and only 2 people in the church spoke French. Of those 2, I was the only one who was qualified as an interpreter. So guess what I ended up doing? Yep, interpreting every Sunday. I say every Sunday, but in truth, those families weren't in the church for that long. After a couple of months, they were gone, never to be seen again. A few things contributed to that sad outcome, but one was particularly fascinating. The leaders of the church felt it was the job of the new arrivals to change their behaviours to fit into the church. And of course, the leaders also thought that these immigrants were going to have to learn English anyway. After all, learning a language is just about learning words, right? What does this have to do with Bible translation and with those old equivalence charts? Quite a lot, actually. You see, these translation scales or charts that we saw are based on a few basic assumptions. The most fundamental is that there exist preset solutions or equivalencies between one language and another. It's as if the Greek word agape was just waiting to be connected with the English word love, or charity, depending on which you prefer. And it's as if splachnidzomai was just waiting for the English word compassion to come along so they could be forever tied together as equivalents. The point of that chart is that we can classify equivalents and choose translations according to which type of equivalents are used. Language doesn't work like that, and translation certainly doesn't work like that. It's not that translators wander along picking preset equivalents off the ground and pop them into their translation. Instead, they actively create the best version they can in another language based on the purpose of the translation, the intended audience, and the resources they have available to help them. What will make sense to one group won't make any sense at all to another. Words that resonate with some people will sound archaic and even silly to other groups, even other groups who use the same language. Equivalence, if it exists at all, isn't something translators find, but something they actively create. It's something that, if it exists at all, is brought into existence when translators translate. And that's what makes translation hard and what makes language learning and settling into new culture hard. It takes time to learn how each language communicates different ideas, how each group of people will use that language to understand what you're translating or trying to say. This, by the way, is why so many translations of the Bible into new languages rely on a lot of community testing. A translation isn't a translation at all if no one understands it, or worse, if they understand something completely different to what the translator intended. The problem with the old equivalent scales isn't so much that they're based on a misinterpretation of the original source, or that they're not useful to translators, or even that they're based on bad translation theories. The problem with the equivalence charts is that they give people entirely the wrong idea about language itself, and set people up to have unhealthy ideas of the people who come into our churches from all around the world and who need to learn English and learn to settle into a new country. If Bible translation is about some kind of equivalence or another, then language learning is about just learning equivalent words or phrases. Someone once seriously said to me that once people could have a conversation or go to a doctor's appointment in English, they were ready for church without an interpreter. Yeah. Those charts also tend to make people want to equate word for word and accurate, meaning that they're less likely to understand why having, say, a Bible in basic English or having versions specifically aimed at teens might be good ideas. Worse, those same charts can make people imagine that as you grow as a Christian, your Bible translation should be more formally equivalent, so you can understand deeper meanings with less interpretation. Instead of a line, we end up with a hierarchy. Is that the fault of the charts themselves? Probably not. But is it an almost inevitable consequence of using them? Probably yes. Those charts might also explain why we expect to look up a word in a concordance and understand exactly what it means every time, as if words mean exactly the same thing every time they're used. Yeah, languages don't work like that either. A drugs bust and a bust in a museum might be spelt the same, but they're very different things. So what should we do instead? It's simple, really. We can ditch those nice, neat charts and lose nothing of value. Instead, we can join Eugene Nida, the rest of the prefaces of our English language Bible translations, every team working on a translation of the Bible into a language in which has never before existed, and most translation teachers, by talking about Bible translations in terms of two things: who they're for, their intended audience, and why they exist, their purpose. It turns out that understanding the intended audience of a Bible translation helps us to work with people to find them a translation that's right for them. Understanding the purpose of a translation helps us to use it effectively. It really is that simple. No diagrams needed, no equivalents needed, and especially no hierarchies needed. It's worth a try, and you never know, it might help us better welcome migrants into our churches as we realise how difficult it is to exist in another language. I'm Dr. Jonathan Downey, and this is Multilingual Church from Integrity Languages.